Hi, today's Moravian reading is Revelation 13, 1 to 10. Now, as we know, Revelation was written to a specific set of churches at a specific time in history, and this message was for them directly. It was also relevant to their context of being under the oppression of the Roman Empire. And much of what it talks about had a direct application in those times. But it's also a message for all churches in all places at all times who are experiencing persecution and who are being called into this place of the heavenly kingdom, that new Jerusalem that the book of Revelation finishes with. So, in the previous chapter, in chapter 12, we're introduced to the dragon, who is that serpent of old, Satan himself, who, along with the angels that he recruits, the fallen angels, the demons, are implacably opposed to God's purpose and God's people. Chapter 12 also speaks about that decisive victory that Jesus wins over Satan through the cross. It's decisive, but it's not yet complete. That awaits the end of time, when the church has completed its work, when the bride emerges ready for the bridegroom and Jesus returns to judge these fallen powers. Now, Satan in chapter 13 recruits and gives authority to this entity called the beast. Now, the beast represents the earthly authorities and personalities who once again are opposed to God's purposes and God's people. Verse 7 talks about there being war on the saints. The vast majority of people, we're told, will worship the beast. They will give their lives to serve this false god, this false philosophy, this thing that is opposed to Jesus and his lordship and his kingdom. It says in this passage that everybody will worship him except those whose name is written in the book of life. Now, a little caveat on that. Earlier in the book, chapter 3, verse 5, talks about those who overcome. Jesus says, I will not erase their name from the book of life. So it can be erased. We can fall away. We can turn against God. We can reject Christ. We can walk away from his kingdom and his purpose in our lives. But we trust in the grace of God that we won't do that, because he is fully committed to us, and his grace and his strength are sufficient for us, whatever life throws at us. So this concludes in verse 10, the second part of verse 10, with this phrase. It says this means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. That's the challenge that this passage leaves us with. You see, our gospel is not a gospel of life enhancement where everything is a bed of roses, where there's never any trouble, nothing ever goes wrong, because that's not the gospel we put our trust in. It's a gospel that he is with us and he helps us through every difficulty, every situation, any kind of persecution. He brings us through and he works it for good in our lives. It's a gospel in which he invites us to follow him wherever he leads us and to be his kingdom people, bringing in his kingdom purpose to this earth in which we live. You see, in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12, Paul says, everybody who seeks to live a godly life will experience persecution. This is normal for Christians. If we're not being persecuted, we're not in a time of normality. And I love this thought that when Jesus was heading to Jerusalem, knowing that he was going to be crucified, he said this, it says this, he set his face resolutely towards Jerusalem. It's like he had an internal kind of complete focus on where he was heading. I believe we need to set our hearts and minds resolutely on that new Jerusalem, that heavenly Jerusalem, the heavenly kingdom which we're going to inherit and be part of, be priests and kings who rule and reign there forever with Jesus. So what price are we prepared to pay? I think of the asylum seekers who make their way to our nation, experiencing tremendous hardship and paying a huge cost to get here. What cost are we prepared to pay for that heavenly kingdom? Are we prepared to be ridiculed, to be persecuted, to even be social outcasts? Christianity is not popular in our post-Christian culture. There's no allowance for it in the marketplace, even in our local community groups. Our Homewatch group says, please don't post anything religious on this Homewatch group, even an invitation to learn how to pray. So how are we to handle these circumstances? If persecution is coming and it's growing, then the question is this: what are we investing in right now so we're ready when the time comes? Are we investing in the right people, the right places, the right things? Or are we coasting through life, hoping it's all going to pan out all right? There's a great prize. There's a great reward. Let's make some great choices and decisions here and now. God bless you.